The Batman is now finally in cinemas, and audiences are excited to see Robert Pattinson take on the role of Bruce Wayne in Matt Reeves' gothic noir thriller. So we've decided to rank every single Batman movie from worst to best, starting from Tim Burton's 1989 classic all the way up to Matt Reeves' The Batman. And just to be clear, we will only be ranking the live-action Batman movies, and the movie where the main focus is Batman. So sorry Lego Batman and sorry Suicide Squad fans, this video ain't for you. Hey team, it's Emily from It's Gone Viral, and thanks so much for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, then make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you're kept up to date with all of our celebrity interviews and games. But now, let's hop in the Batmobile and head towards Gotham, as we rank the Batman movies from worst to best. There really was only one place to start with this video, and of course, it was the late, great and wonderfully camp Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin. Where do we even start to dissect it? The Batsuit with nipples? Arnold Schwarzenegger's $25 million performance as Mr. Freeze? Uma Thurman's poison ivy dancing with gorillas, or the fact that this movie essentially almost killed the entire Batman movie franchise. Starring George Clooney in his only outing as Bruce Wayne, Batman and Robin has become simultaneously everyone's fondest and least favourite Batman movie of all time. Schumacher's vision of Gotham is, as you'd expect, loud, colourful and camp, and as time has passed, people have begun to finally accept it for what it is. But at the time of its release in 1997, it was considered to be one of the worst superhero movies of all time, and is now mainly remembered for bat nipples and Mr. Freeze's puns.
What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age!
That really was $25 million well spent, wasn't it? I think we can all agree that Ben Affleck had a bit of a tough time in the role of Batman. With Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice arguably his first and only standalone outing in the role, which he still shared with another superhero. This movie kind of sums up where the whole of the DCEU was in 2016, and as a result, it's an overly long, predictable bore fest that did neither Affleck or Henry Cavill justice. It's such a shame as well, because Batman vs Superman had so much potential, and clearly, the DCEU's attempt to bring their two biggest superheroes together was inspired by the miraculous cinematic events that Marvel were producing at the time. The only real difference was that Marvel were embarking on one of the most ambitious movie crossover events in cinematic history, and DC were essentially trying to make a shed load of money by seeing their most iconic heroes face off against each other. And to be fair, that's exactly what they did. Batman v Superman took over $800 million at the box office, but pretty much everyone hated it. And that's why we've ranked it as one of the worst Batman movies ever made. Say what you will about Val Kilmer's only outing as Bruce Wayne, and Joel Schumacher's first time in the director's chair for Batman Forever. But you can't deny it, it's simply great fun from start to finish. This is, in many ways, a throwback to when big-budget superhero movies didn't have to be so intricately woven into various universes, or weren't expected to win numerous awards, and was in fact just a really fun and colourful take on The Dark Knight. In a very clear and obvious tonal change from Tim Burton's gothic Gotham, Schumacher's vision was full of colour, wit and madness, perhaps summed up best by Jim Carrey's fantastic performance as the Riddler, wearing what can only be described as a costume that is simply far too tight. Taking over $300 million at the box office, Batman Forever became one of the highest-grossing movies of 1995, and many fans were excited to see what Schumacher would do in the sequel, only to discover that he'd almost killed the franchise entirely with 1997's Batman and Robin, which, as we discussed, is utter shit. You might be surprised to see this one as low as it is on our list, but hear us out. The Dark Knight Rises does a superb job in tying up all the loose ends in Christopher Nolan's trilogy, and given the monumental success of its predecessor, The Dark Knight, it was always going to be difficult to top it, and Nolan deserves immense credit for finishing off a groundbreaking trilogy with another very enjoyable movie. Having said that, it's certainly not without its faults. It's very long, it borders on being overly complicated, and we're still not entirely sure what happens to Bane in the final battle. Does he just stop for good? Because he's not dead? He just gets knocked over and ceases to be an evil villain anymore. Oh no, hang on. Maybe we're overcomplicating it now. Damn you, Christopher Nolan. Despite a few admittedly small annoyances though, The Dark Knight Rises boasts some excellent performances from Christian Bale, Tom Hardy, Anne Hathaway and Marion Cotillard, and in typical Nolan fashion, leaves us asking plenty of questions at the end of the movie. But we do feel that out of all of Nolan's movies in the trilogy, this is the weakest one. Tim Burton returned with his sequel to 1989's Batman with Batman Returns, and to this day we often wonder what was going through the costume department's heads when they created this monstrosity of a costume for Danny DeVito. Batman Returns saw Michael Keaton return to the role following his iconic performance in Burton's first movie, Batman, and was paid the handsome figure of $10 million to do so. But it's fair to say that Keaton's performance is somewhat overshadowed by Michelle Pfeiffer's portrayal as Selina Kyle and Catwoman, who really steals the show. Despite the superb additions to the cast, with DeVito as the Penguin and Christopher Walken as the villainous businessman Max Schreck, Batman Returns never really hits the same heights as its predecessor, and instead focuses a lot more on greed and corruption in Gotham, which are central themes to many later adaptations. Burton's Gothic interpretation is still very evident, but there's a surprising lack of caped crusader action at the start of the movie, and it takes the best part of an hour for it to really feel like a Batman movie. Having said that, Batman Returns serves up some of the most iconic images of any Batman movie, and also provided fans with what is surely the least threatening supervillain weapon in cinematic history, a Swiss Army umbrella. The movie that gave us our first glimpse at Christian Bale's Batman. In order to fully understand the impact this movie had on Batman, we once again need to return to the aftermath of Batman and Robin. Given the terrible performance of Batman and Robin, fans had to wait another 8 long years before The Dark Knight returned to our screens. But when it did, under the guidance and vision of the acclaimed and at the time up-and-coming director Christopher Nolan, fans couldn't believe what they'd seen. Nolan knew that the only way to bring Batman back was to completely change the game, showing Gotham as a realistic and busy city, and using the innate and very real fear of terror attacks in the US post 9/11. Not only did Nolan create a Gotham that looked like it was in need of a vigilante, he provided fans with a near-perfect origin story for Bruce Wayne, showing us how he became Batman and how he honed the skills that he would rely on in order to become the Dark Knight. Throw into this already exciting mix an excellent cast including Cillian Murphy, Liam Neeson and, of course, Michael Caine. Nolan gave us believable villains and showed the world that a new kind of superhero movie was not only achievable but necessary, and set things up perfectly for the rest of his Dark Knight trilogy. Next up on our list is Tim Burton's iconic movie that brought Batman and one of the all-time great villainous performances to the big screen, the 1989 hit movie Batman. It's hard to imagine today, but audiences had to wait over 20 years for a new Batman movie to hit cinemas, with Adam West's Batman being the last movie released in 1969. And audiences at the time were blown away by Burton's gothic yet charming take on Gotham, and of course Bruce Wayne's origin story. When you think of Burton's Batman, you probably immediately think of Jack Nicholson's iconic performance of the Joker, a performance that forever immortalised him as one of the cinema's greatest villains, playing the role of an unhinged psychopath perfectly, whilst also capturing his sick sense of humour and jokey charisma. Playing opposite Nicholson and taking on the role of Bruce Wayne for the first time was Michael Keaton. And it's hard to believe now, but this was a casting decision that prompted over 50,000 angry letters and complaints to the studio, which, looking back on it now, is nothing less than hilarious. Because Keaton's Batman is one of the most highly praised of any actor that's had the pleasure of putting on the Batsuit. Can you imagine if Twitter had been around then? Keaton would have immediately been cancelled. Burton brought his trademark quirky gothic charm to the Batman franchise, and the audience loved it, with the movie taking over an astonishing $400 million, which back in '89 was almost unheard of. And this film, in many ways, set the Batman franchise on its course to become one of the biggest franchises in cinematic history. Okay, so fair warning with this one. The video is being released the day that the Batman comes out in cinemas, so there may be spoilers in our summary, so you have been warned. But if you've made it this far into the video, then you'll have probably worked out the Batman really is one of the best Batman movies of all time. Matt Reeves' brutal gothic thriller is arguably unlike any other Batman movie we've seen before, whilst at the same time it feels like it's borrowed all the best bits from its predecessors. All the glamour and flashy state-of-the-art tech that we've become so accustomed to associating with Bruce Wayne is gone, and is replaced by a much more grungy and gritty approach to his vigilante work. And this is no more evident than with the new Batmobile, in which you get to see one of the best car chases of the entire Batman franchise. Not only that, but the performances in this movie are astonishing, with Paul Dano putting in a completely psychotic performance as the Riddler, and one that will rightly go down as one of the best Batman villains of all time. Colin Farrell also puts in a perfect performance as the Penguin, the sleazy gangster of which we're sure to see much more of in the future. Robert Pattinson's brutal, damaged and no-nonsense approach to the Caped Crusader is a much-welcomed portrayal of Bruce Wayne, and he makes for an excellent Batman. And Zoe Kravitz also puts in an excellent performance as Catwoman and Selina Kyle. The only downsides are that it does feel slightly too long, and you could argue that Reeves tries to fit too much into one movie. And there are moments where, because they're trying to tell numerous stories at once, it does lose some of its momentum. But, and this is a big but, it's an incredible debut for a director taking on their first Batman project. And don't be surprised if this movie is considered as one of the greatest Batman movies ever in a few years' time. This was always going to be at number 1, wasn't it? And let's just go all out and say from the off that The Dark Knight is a cinematic masterpiece. Following on from the gritty and grounded world that Nolan created in Batman Begins, The Dark Knight took things to an even more extraordinary level. If you can believe that's possible. Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker left viewers scared and stunned in one of the best cinematic performances of all time. And every time the Joker scene is on screen, you are completely transfixed. And not only that, but Aaron Eckhart's descent from Harvey Dent, Gotham's heralded White Knight, to the evil Two-Face provides The Dark Knight with two of the best Batman villains and supervillain storylines of all time. The continual cat-and-mouse chase that occurs on screen between Batman and the Joker is played out perfectly, with Nolan ensuring that the audience, as well as Bruce Wayne, are always one step behind the clown prince of crime, culminating in Batman putting his fate in the people of Gotham for arguably the first time on screen, before being hounded out of Gotham as public enemy number 1. The Dark Knight became a box office and cultural phenomenon, smashing records and earning Heath Ledger's Joker not only a posthumous Academy Award, but a place in cinematic history for his iconic and manic performance. Almost 15 years on since its release, The Dark Knight is still regarded as the best superhero movie ever made, and also one of the greatest movies of all time, inspiring a whole new generation of movie makers and actors, and that is why it's in number 1 on our list. And that's our list of the best Batman movies. But we want to know what you guys think. Do you agree with us? Let us know in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, then make sure you give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching It's Gone Viral.